next to the guy that wrote the book on it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So, and then I
It's
said,
fun,
well,
isn't it?
yeah. And I'm like, hey, another thing that bothers me is this. And I totally went in another direction and never answered the question. So, anyway, that's my life story.
Welcome, everybody, to Addiction Unfiltered. Today on our podcast, we have Dr. Stephanie Hutter Thomas. She is the director for the Birch Project at WVU School of Medicine, founder and CEO of Appalachian Recovery Concepts, LLC. She has a huge list of things that she does, and today on the podcast, we'll be talking about a number of them, and hopefully we can cover them all. Welcome, Stephanie Hutter Thomas.
Thank you.
Hey, Stephanie.
Hi
How are you?
there. I am fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this for several weeks now. So, I want to talk about the first time that we met. Um, we were at a function. It was a training session, and as you normally do, you sign in to these things, put your email and all that. And I was kind of standing next to you, and I remember looking over at you saying, "Oh, I think this girl's in recovery, and she's probably here to tell her story." And little did I know that this little lady sitting next to me or standing next to me has a PhD, and she's into all kinds of things that have to do with recovery and helping other people. And so I just thought that was interesting. And plus, you're into the body art, and I think that's cool. And and so what I'm saying is, you don't fit your typical mold of what I would consider to be someone that has a PhD in higher learning.
Yeah, one of my favorite sort of catchphrases I throw out there often, and I mean, I truly mean it when I say it, but it's almost kind of humorous, is, I always think of it as my lived experiences are the things that actually make me the subject matter expert in this situation. And the letters after my name just make people listen. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being the little petite woman from Appalachia, especially after getting tattooed, people don't necessarily want to take you all that seriously. And so I just decided that I would start pursuing the graduate degrees until people did start taking me more seriously. And here we are.
And now they do.
Yeah.
That's cool. I love that. And I will also mention that you were featured in Allegheny Magazine as one of the top 25 most fascinating people of 2021. So that's awesome. So, so anyway, I'm really excited about you being here. And so let's just kind of get right into it. Let's tell us a little bit about what you do, and why you do it, and why you wanted to come and share this information with us.
All right. Well, I was born and raised in Western Maryland, and I had left the area like in 2006 when I married my husband, and I moved to Ohio, and I was gone for about a decade. And a lot of things in life happened, including my husband's own struggle with opioid use disorder, and he had a pretty profound return to behavior that we struggled with for a while. And it taught me a lot, and it brought things full circle. And then lo and behold, in 2016, my father died by suicide. And it was truly devastating. And it was, in the line with multiple other traumatic events. And all of this is happening while I'm going to grad school. And initially, when I was in grad school, I thought that, hey, I'm a body piercer. We have a body art studio. I'm probably just going to keep researching things about body art, why people do what they do. And it wasn't until my father's suicide, which was sort of, I guess, the crescendo of all of the things that had been happening prior. I moved back to Western Maryland, and in that moment, just knew that I needed to put these graduate degrees to work. I saw the state of my hometown. I was able to reflect on my own past, my husband's struggles, and things that I saw around me. And I just felt like, okay, if you're going to do something truly purposeful in your life, now's the time.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
So talk about a little bit about some of the things you're involved with, specific projects, things that you're excited about, and a little bit about that. And then we'll get into some talking about social determinants of health and ACEs study, which is a fascinating study to me. But what kind of specific things are you excited about right now?
Well, right now, my full-time role, or my day job, as I, jokingly refer to it as, is directing the Birch Project at WVU School of Medicine. And that's actually a partnership with Yale School of Medicine, as well as the West Virginia Primary Care Association and the West Virginia Practice-Based Research Network. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're working with 20 primary care health centers in the state of West Virginia to integrate screening and treatment for opioid use disorder, as well as HIV and hepatitis C. And so essentially, we're sort of coaching and providing ongoing supports to these health centers to help them, add these services to their menu, and, through that expand access to, to care for people with these diseases. Rather than, adding to the stigma by pushing people away into specialized care. And so that's the day job aspect of things. And then I have Appalachian Recovery Concepts, which is, my LLC that sort of houses all of the contractual work that I do with various other partners. One of them is the Mountain Maryland Forward Project, which I'm really, really excited about. I work with the University of Maryland Center for Substance Use, Addiction, and Health Research on that project. And essentially, we secured a $1 million grant from the U.S. Department of Labor for the development and implementation of a recovery workforce project that, sort of incentivizes private employers to consider offering second chance employment. And it's also about sort of, scooping people up in the recovery community who are, looking to make those connections and get back into the workforce, and then providing that ongoing coaching and mentoring and support. I also do a lot of peer training in the state of Maryland, and a lot of working one-on-one with peers throughout the state. And, it just kind of keeps going from there, working on some curricula development for peers and sort of different sectors, so to speak. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
So, the peer thing, I'm a peer recovery support specialist, and, I don't know when that all started, but it's really a whole industry that didn't really exist. Yeah. And, but what's the importance of peers? Let's touch on that for a minute.
Everything.
Why peers? Everything?
Yes, everything. I mean, here, I think of it like this. I try to frame it under many different ideas. Like, if you're gonna go talk about cars and look for advice or support going through the process of buying a car, you're gonna go to people that have experience with this. The same goes for any other service, or specialized thing, that we're reaching out for. We want people who understand this, who've been there. And so it just makes complete sense, people who, I don't want to say with substance use disorders, because some people do have problematic substance use or challenges with substance use, but are not necessarily meeting the criteria for a disorder. So I want to kind of be careful how I say that. But anybody that's experiencing problematic substance use of one form or another is going to generally be better served, especially in the beginning, by someone who does have that lived experience, has experience navigating systems, and, can help that person feel less othered, because, we're talking about some of the most vulnerable and most stigmatized people within our populations.
Yes. And so we don't just, yes, we can relate to people. I can relate. I can go to the jail, the regional jail here, and instantly relate. I went out there today and I met with like 6 people. And I'm just telling you, there's this connection, because
Right.
they're in there basically because of substance use disorder. And but as soon as I sit down and start talking to them, we connect. And we talked about this last night, how people in Appalachia uh, are marginalized. That's the word you used.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, what you mean by that, and how that's actually a fact. You believe
Right.
that?
Yeah, without going too much into the weeds because we'd be here all night. But, essentially, historically, Appalachia has been a geographic area containing a population of othered people. So when we say marginalized, we mean people who are othered, people who are otherwise rejected or pushed out of mainstream circles, who often have fewer accesses to resources and things of that nature. And so, when we're talking about things like addiction, okay, people with substance use disorder or problematic substance use already then fall into what we would refer to as a vulnerable population, right? Folks that need some support, who probably are struggling with some needs, those social determinants of health that were mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
But then we can add layers to that, right? So like if you're a woman, that's another layer now of marginalization on top of your addiction diagnosis or your behavioral struggle. If you are a person of color, or if you are a member of the LGBTQIA population, so you can just keep adding layers of othering. Being Appalachian, particularly rural Appalachian, is
Mhm.
another layer to that othering. And so that's the interesting thing in trying to develop programming and supports in a crisis like this, is you have to go deep with all these layers and kind of customize the support that's being provided. But I wanted to speak for a moment on what you mentioned when we were having the sort of defining of peers conversation. I think that one of the things that makes peer work so important, obviously the lived experience is the part that leads to the connection, that relatability, like you were talking about, Mark. But the other piece then beyond that, definitely the resource brokering, connecting people to resources, but this social capital piece is incredibly important. Addiction, as with many other diseases, can be one of the most loneliest existences, as people become more alienated or cut a person off, or maybe that person entering recovery needs to walk away from family members and people who were once their close friends in order to preserve their own recovery status. It's really important for people to know that there are others out there that they can connect with that will support their new lifestyle choice and help them feel less alone. So there's that piece, but there's also modeling, social modeling. Peers represent what recovery can look like. And it's important for everyone in the community, not just people who are struggling, to actually see that people do recover. And the thing is that modeling doesn't work so well if that initial connection isn't made. So I feel like the lived experience sort of is like a conduit, it kind of makes the connection and allows that person to open themselves up to receiving some of the help being offered.
Absolutely. And we're not saying, of course, the work of peers is extremely important. It's extremely effective.
Yeah.
I know a guy that owns a recovery home, and he says if you have a good peer working in the house, it's worth its weight in gold. If you have one that's, maybe they should be doing something else, I don't know, but they're not really tuned in, or maybe don't have the compassion that others do. He said it doesn't work well. But that doesn't mean that peers are the only people that can help. And so there's other ways, and we'll be talking about some of that, because that's a lot about what you're involved in. And is It's not just the peers' job. Okay, let the peers do the job or do the work, and let us all sit back and watch and see if it works. That's not what we're talking about.
I
No.
wanted to say something real quick about you spoke about like othered. I've heard a lot about that lately, mostly in reference to slavery and Nazis, which, it makes it, when you look at someone as an other, they just, we're explaining how it makes it so easy to, well, murder them, honestly, to do
Yeah.
anything regardless, and I see that a lot. I think in recovery, almost any addict is probably feels othered immediately before they ever even get to recovery, I would imagine.
Yeah.
When you, if you were to ever relate it to, Nazi Germany and slavery, I can't imagine how that would feel. That'd be a tough feeling. So I
Yeah.
can see how peers, are super important in that situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we've already said that peers can't be the only ones that get involved and try to help correct this epidemic that we have in Appalachia. So let's talk about. Can we talk about social determinants of health? What that is and how that affects everyone, and how we can correct some of these things?
Absolutely. And you're completely correct. This cannot be all peers. And I also think it's important to note, this is not something we can arrest our way out of. We cannot treat our way out of it. It has to be holistic. All the treatment in the world will only do so much good for a person who is unhoused and has no means of transportation or no means of making money. So we have to look at this as the whole person. We have to look at this holistically. So that means everybody. This is a call to action. There's things that every single person, regardless of your own status in your community, your experience levels, every adult can do something that helps to push, the needle forward, as we are attempting to, work towards community healing. I think, especially in our rural Appalachian communities who have been hit the hardest. So, we have to think of it in terms of jobs, food insecurity, housing, childcare, social determinants of health are all of the conditions that we are born in, live in, play in, work in, you know, um, everything around you. What resources do you have, to tap into? Do you have a stable support network at home with your family? What about education and job opportunities, and how sustainable are these things? So when we're talking about addressing this crisis, I mean, we really should be looking within our own little local communities and looking around and figuring out where the gaps are and jumping in. And so, for example, when I say every person can do their part, every one of us, when we're doing, things around the house and we have things that we don't want or use anymore, we can stop being, so geared towards disposal and actually donate these items, to places in town who are helping people who are attempting to get back on their feet. We can pay attention to who we vote for, and really think in terms of things like public health and human services. Get trained in administering Narcan and make sure you carry it with you everywhere you go. And, gently, correct friends and community members when you hear people saying things that are stigmatizing or that are incorrect. Give yourself a chance to get more educated on the topic so you can be one of the many ambassadors out there, standing up and advocating for people who don't always have their own voice. So, it takes a village, because every single person out there affected by addiction is somebody's mom, dad, daughter, brother, sister, child, etc. And, we have got to stop this, this labeling and this othering that happens, that leaves people lonely and afraid and ultimately sick and dying.
I said this before on this podcast, and I'll keep saying it. I don't think there's a person out there, not many, if there's any, that are not affected by addiction or substance use disorder, either personally or knowing someone or someone in your family, especially in this area, which is basically has been the epicenter of the opioid crisis for several years. Now, I know we're making some improvements here and there, but it's still an issue. And I don't know if we're number one as far as overdoses per capita, but we're up there still, probably 3 at least. So, and I don't think people really look at addiction or substance use disorder like they just say, why don't they just stop?
Right.
And it is a very complex issue. Addiction is a complex problem. It's mental, it's spiritual, it's physical, it's emotional, it's and all of those things you talked about, all of the things that the way that we grow up and the things we have or don't have, that all affects our self-esteem. And I'll just tell you that after doing this job for 5 years, I've just come to the conclusion that addiction is a complex problem, but what you got to do is get to the root of the problem. Why is it that you feel better on drugs than off? Because I did. I didn't start using drugs like smoking pot and drinking and on the other things because, I wanted to be a career addict. I did it because I wanted to be like my brother. I wanted to be cool because my brother, I looked up to him, and I know that he would go out and party with his friends in high school. So I couldn't wait to follow in his footsteps. But what happened was when I started experimenting with those things, I felt better for temporarily. I felt pretty good. I'm like, because I didn't know I had low self-esteem. I didn't know that I had an inferiority complex. I thought that just when I partied, I was this fun-loving guy that everybody liked. But what I was a wrecking ball. I mean, I destroyed relationships and I hurt people, and it was selfish and narcissistic and all of those things. But I didn't know it was because I had a low self-image. I remember sitting in an AA meeting and a guy said, I was an egomaniac with a low self-image. I'm like, that is me. That was me trying to overcompensate because I didn't feel like I was as good as other people. So I tried to overcompensate. So I became egotistical. And so, but let's talk about ACEs for a minute, because I think this would be a good time to talk about that, because I don't know, 15 years after I went through my recovery, I'm 15 years into it, I find out about this thing called ACEs study. And man, when I saw the movie, I was like, wow. I mean, not that it didn't really change anything, but it answered a lot of questions as to why I was the way I was and why I felt better under the influence of something than just comfortable in my own skin and living life on life's terms. But it was because of the adverse childhood experiences that I had. And that's not making an excuse, but it's answering some questions. It's people are like, someday they're going to find this gene that we'll be able to tell who will be addicted and who won't be, and I'm like, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I think it has more to do with adverse childhood experience or trauma. So let's talk about that. I know you're very interested in that, and you work in that field.
Yeah, the ACEs study, I mean, the thing that's so fascinating about it really is, how simplistic it is really, to look at for such a complex issue. So basically, for anybody not familiar, the ACEs study was something that happened in the 90s, very large population sample size. I think it was something like 17,000 participants in the study. And, the long and short of it was they were able to narrow down a list of 10 situations that if they occur before the age of 18, have the potential to have serious long-term impacts on our development, our health, as well as our ability to resist substance use and things of that nature, and it sort of it affects a whole multitude of things, and it can get lengthy, but that's kind of the gist of it. I definitely suggest people look it up. The CDC has a wealth of information about the ACEs study on their website, and it's very user friendly. But what I was going to say that's interesting about ACEs, so we know that ACEs increase people's risk of certain behaviors and increase people's risk of marrying people with addiction and heart disease and all these different things. But we've also learned that if you put the right support mechanisms in place for that person, then that likelihood of these risk behaviors significantly reduces. So what does that mean? Well, that means, think about how many times someone has said to you, well, I had a rough childhood too, and I didn't do this or that,
Right.
Right. And we all do that. We sit there and go, well, geez, my parents got divorced and I turned out okay. My friend over here experienced that, and look what's going on. So, that is part of the explanation. Some of us, and I would be one of them, I have an ACE score 7. You can only have 10,
Right.
right? So that's
Right. Yeah.
and I did have my share of delinquency and problematic behavior when I was young and things like that. But now here I am, about to be 51 years old, and I've got my education and I've got my stability. And part of that really, comes down to the fact that I had the right supports in place. If we're thinking in terms of prevention in our communities, we go to ACEs. Like, we can support people and use our knowledge of ACEs to be gentle with them and to have empathy and to shift that conversation from saying, what the hell's wrong with you, to saying, oh my goodness, what happened to you? I'm the co-chair for the Cumberland Skate Park Committee. And I mean, I like to skate. I like to skate when I was a kid and stuff, and a lot of people are like, geez, Steph, you're so busy. How can you do this? And they're right. I really didn't have time to do it. But in my head, all I kept thinking was, this is an ACEs protective factor. If we can get the city and county to invest in the construction of this social space for our young people here, then I can put out calls to action to all of the local human services agencies that I partner with and encourage them to get on board with developing programming to use the park. So once again, this is like an effort to help provide additional supports to many of our young people in the community that maybe don't have those protective factors in their household or within their family, structure.
Awesome. And I don't look back and second guess. I mean, every experience I went through, I'm where I'm at now today. And it was because of that. And so I like that shirt. I wish I would have come up with this saying, God took my mess and made a message. It has a happy ending. I'm still married. I have 2 beautiful kids. But when I learned about that, and there's also a resilience test, right? Resiliency tests out there. And that's why, people that go through bad things, some of them go on to do great things, but mainly because they probably had the support system, or maybe they were just like, I'm not going to let that get me down. I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. But not everybody's like that. So, I was
I think
blown
it's a
away.
balance.
What's
It's
that?
a balance, right? It's a balance,
Sure.
is what I always think. Cause it's like, you're right. We need to have like some grit, we need to have a little bit of adversity in our life so that we want to fight and push forward and be, resilient. But then, it can go obviously too far. But then on the other end of the spectrum, it's the same thing. If someone never has any of that, then they don't really get an opportunity to develop those coping skills then either. Right. Because
They
someone
become
else
like a bowl of jelly, right?
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, and so anyway, again, we've talked about ACEs on this program before. We'll continue to talk about it. And so when I meet with people, I always just tell them, look, get to the root of the problem. What is it? Almost 100% of the people that I talk to in jail, I always ask them, why do you think you use drugs? And they always, most of them, are like 98% of them, like, well, when I was a kid, my dad was an alcoholic. He used to beat us, blah, blah. You hear all these horror stories. And so, it's just to numb the pain, and to numb the pain of my childhood or numb the pain of some kind of trauma that it doesn't even have to be, early childhood. It can be later even. And I think even adults experience trauma. And we need to learn how to deal with trauma. I hear people relapsing. The number one reason I hear people say that they relapse was a death in the family. It was either a grandmother or grandfather or a mom, could be a child even, which I can't imagine. But and so it's traumatic. And so we need to, I don't know how you prepare yourself for that. None of us are going to live forever, but we need to try and prepare ourselves for trauma and how to deal with it and have a good support system.
Mind body skills is one of the many things we can do. I mean, we have all these resources out there on the internet, but folks don't always know how to find things or what to even search for. I actually got involved with a training back right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, which, was basically learning to facilitate mind body skills work groups with people through the Center of Mind Body Medicine in Washington, D.C. And, it was a great experience because I was thinking the same thing you were saying, Mark, as I was thinking like, okay, we know coping is a problem. And yes, there are medications out there for folks and things. And I, support that if that's what helps people. But at the end of the day, when we're looking at long-term, like forever, down the road, helping people in general, both individually and collectively, learn how to cope with the traumas that go on in day-to-day life. I saw that, the mind body skills as being one of the many things that we have to start having more dialogues around that and getting people comfortable with it.
Like you were talking about, a call to action for people to get involved. Now, before we get into that, I got a question here, and I just want to see what your opinion is on this. Do you think, and I think I already know, do you think that the substance use disorder problem will be solved clinically?
I think that the clinical piece is definitely part of that puzzle. I don't know that you can necessarily remove any of these gears from this assembly, right? I mean,
Right.
because there are certainly some folks who landed in their addiction behaviors due to, maybe unaddressed, or even undiagnosed health problems that may need to be medicated. But then there's folks that maybe just really don't want to be medicated. Like I encounter a lot of folks like that.
Me too.
I don't know about you, but I do,
Yes.
folks who have struggled with addiction, but they're like, man, I just do not want to be medicated. And so I think that, the clinical thing needs to be a piece of it, and it needs to not be shamed, right? Like medications for opioid use disorder and things like that need to be accepted just as any other medication, for any other disease. But I also think that we truly need to individualize care. We need to
Right.
get away from this assembly line idea in individualized care.
Yeah, because everybody's different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the clinical part of it is a piece of the puzzle or one of the
Yeah.
gears. The ACEs score, I think, is another one.
Mhm.
I was going to add,
Yeah.
I feel like a huge part is we have to stop criminalizing addicts. Once you criminalize or at least felonize, if an addict has a felony, I mean, think of all the rights that are taken away.
I
Right
would
to
like,
vote. All these
yeah,
rights that they're not even allowed to protect themselves. They can't own
I
a
would
gun.
love to speak to
So
that for a second.
yeah,
Yeah, because you bring up a very valid point. So thank you for that. We talked about social determinants of health, and incarceration is actually its own social determinant of health.
Mm.
And so, when you remove, for example, prime working age adults from their home, and we criminalize whatever their behavior was, nonviolent behavior, and incarcerate them, we not only impact their future and their current situation and their families, but now we are impacting the entire trajectory of their neighborhood. Because the more this happens, the more single parent homes you see, the less revenue in that neighborhood, the more kids who are dealing with one of their parents not being in the home. And if we're talking some of the more urban areas, that can really, be a big catalyst in, gang affiliation and things like that, because now all of a sudden you've got this neighborhood with all these kids that don't have a lot of their fathers in the picture, and so then, of course, add to that, the trauma of the incarceration experience itself, add to that, the lost time, the lost work, et cetera. And then the health risks that come because, the rate of disease, the risk rate is much higher, in jails and prisons. And then when the person gets out, on a federal level, there are roughly 670 some collateral consequences of incarceration. So when someone gets out, they're looking at about 670 some mechanisms that are gonna make it really hard to return to citizenship. And only about 20 to 30% of those actually have some sort of solution in place where a person can do a handful of things or whatever and qualify for some sort of a reprieve, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, federal, there's the state repercussions. Those collateral consequences of the state. I think in Maryland right now, there's something like 1,200 or 1,300 of those collateral consequences. So that's like, you're approaching 2,000, collateral consequences here just from having been incarcerated for a nonviolent crime due to a disease.
Yep. Yeah, I've definitely witnessed that a number of times with friends and family, and it's rough to watch, and I mean, I can't imagine, having your right to vote and protect yourself taken away. That just seems, even if you're a criminal, it just seems kind of odd to me.
At least forever anyway.
Right.
We tend to, with the incarcerated, we always want to look at this as like, oh, like people don't change, but we let people get away with all sorts of stuff out here. But for some reason, certain things we don't. And that is definitely a problem. And, not only is the incarceration experience a social determinant of health for, the person, but it's also a social determinant of health for their family in their household, and a source of adverse childhood experiences for any children left behind once they're incarcerated. Parental incarceration is one of the questions on the ACEs scale.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would like to see them change how we deal with, I'm talking about people that are addicted, people with substance use disorder, and they get caught. And I'm not talking about dealers, people out there, that's what they do for a living. And I think that's a separate issue. But just the people that, okay, I got a grand larceny charge because I needed to steal to get money so I could buy drugs. Or I know a guy I was talking to in jail today, he's in there because he stole a flashlight at like a dollar store, got caught, and he was on probation, and now he's looking at prison time for a flashlight. Well, what's more than the flashlight? It was all the other things he did, and he couldn't behave, or chose not to behave, or maybe he didn't have the tools to behave like he should have. I'm not making excuses, but I would like it to see us revamp that, because as overcrowded as the jails are, if we could find a better way to deal with people who get caught, you know why I never went to prison? Why I never went to jail? I never got caught. Okay, I was just lucky. Every time I go to the jail, it's by God's grace that I didn't have to experience that, and that the only difference is they got caught, because I
Right.
could have easily went to jail for some of the things I was involved with. So, yeah, so definitely, and it would solve at least in part, the overcrowding issue that we have in the regional jails, I think, and it would help people. because we're basically, when you talk about it being part of the ACEs score, we're basically just going in a
Yeah.
circle, then, aren't we?
It's a pipeline. It's a
Yeah.
pipeline, essentially. Yeah.
So
And we're setting people up for this. And I mean, I know, when we start getting into the political aspects of all of that, it can become a very difficult thing because, obviously from the human side, I think most of us, um, can agree that the incarceration experience doesn't appear to always be the most humane thing, right?
right.
And I think most people can agree with that. But at the same time, I know it's a challenge when you're trying to approach systems because there's a lot of jobs tied up in this stuff. There's a lot of money tied up, and there's a long history, and so it's going to take years to get some of that reform going, I think. But I think that, the more communities really step up and take care of each other. There's so much divisiveness, so much separatism, like, in isolation. Like, let's get together. Appalachia has historically been a collectivist culture, where people came together, and I believe that is still there in the core. I just think that this overdose epidemic rattled people to their core, and now we need to reset and get back to who we are, as the helping community members we all can be, and just step in there with what resources you got and do what you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that I have noticed the healthcare industry trying to at least do some of their part as far as cutting back on how many opioids they're prescribing and stuff like that, and having a lot more controls on that, which is nice. And that's
Yes.
definitely the first step, I would say.
Yeah, it's been very restricted. And, and now though, I mean, we've got the removal of the X waiver. And so now when we're talking about, getting access to drugs like buprenorphine, which is a medication for opioid use disorder. Now any physician or provider that is authorized by the DEA to prescribe narcotics can prescribe that. Like, and that's amazing. When I think about the state of West Virginia, I think about, because that's where we're doing the Birch Project, the transportation issue, obviously profound. The limited number of practices up to this point who were prescribing buprenorphine. And then the reality that some folks were living literally an hour to 2 hours or more away from the nearest prescriber. No wonder West Virginia has struggled with their public health numbers during this overdose crisis, So, hopefully, work like the work we're doing with Birch, where we're bringing in these extra supports to help some of these centers make these changes. And there's subtle changes to their process flows, that will then open up access to people who desperately need these services.
That's why I like the mobile units.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of mobile units in West Virginia where they go to the people. They go where the people are, because it's a rural community, basically, So
yeah,
that was a brilliant idea. Whoever thought of that, you're a smart person.
Yeah, we do a lot of that in Maryland too, and it's growing.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it continues to do so, and it picks up pace, because we need it out there.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, listen, we're coming down to the end here. And so is there any other thing that you would like to talk about or mention before I ask you your last question?
Well, let's see. I've got a new project, a new nonprofit that I just recently, got all the legal filings completed for, and everything's official. So, my business partner and I will be launching the Underdog Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that will be geared towards providing all sorts of different supports to various marginalized populations, but specifically working with peers, people in recovery who are looking to get back out there. We're going to be offering peer trainings and mentorship and, research opportunities, all sorts of fun stuff. So keep your eyes open for that. And I think the Mountain Maryland Forward project is taking off now. It's getting off the ground, so I'm expecting it to grow exponentially. So keep your eyes peeled there too, because it sounds like some of the other regions of Maryland are wanting to jump on board and replicate the program. So who knows, we might spread.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we may have to have you back to report on some of these projects.
Absolutely. I would love to.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Hey, so I guess the last thing I want to just have you sum everything up. I just want you to I want to know what you want your message to be to everyone that's watching, and talk about that. And I think that's it.
Okay. I would say that, the message I always try to put out there anytime I do an interview or any kind of teaching or public speaking is, number one, I'm all about transparency. It's a lot easier to advocate and teach others how to advocate if we are all willing to be open about who we are. If we want the shaming to stop around, mental health and things like that, then we have to all stop hiding. There's no shame in owning it if you've experienced depression or, you've gone through a rough time. And sometimes saying those things out loud is the very words someone else in the room really needed to hear to inspire them to, reach out or try to pursue wellness. So I think, just learning to be a little bit more open, a little more transparent, and, that if we all did that, that would reduce the feelings of shame significantly and address stigma. And I think the other piece of it is what we sort of started to hit on earlier is that, we're not going to treat our way out of it. We're not going to arrest our way out of it. This is an issue with multiple moving parts, and it's something that requires all hands on deck. We need the clinical services and supports. We need the research, we need the education and the community outreach. We need housing and workforce and transportation and all of these things, but even down to individual community members. Each and every one of us has the power to contribute meaningfully, and it doesn't have to be huge. It really doesn't have to be huge. If you are a business owner, give some consideration to becoming a recovery-friendly workplace. And next time you're hiring, consider reaching out to your local recovery groups, because there may be some folks there that, really just need to get back to work. Any of your events that you're having, consider including the recovery community in that. When your county is celebrating Recovery Month, put those purple lights in your window, with pride, and show that, you're an ally to the recovery community, because, anybody that's experiencing othering or being marginalized, the one thing they want and need more than anything else is allyship. People who are true and authentic and are there to stand next to them and fight the fight and give them the support that they need. So that's my call to action.
All the action.
Figure out what you, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, listen, Dr. Stephanie Hutter Thomas, thank you so much for being here today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I look forward to this for several weeks, and I look forward to us speaking again on this platform and sharing some more information.
Yeah,
and I hope to meet you someday.
Awesome.
It was
yes,
awesome
we'll have to
having a
arrange
conversation
that.
with you. Yeah, sure.
You're the coolest doctor I know.
Right on. Thank you guys so much.
Hang around after we close out, would you, for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I was found here.